everybody, and welcome to my channel. My name is Debra Lynn, and if it's your first time here, welcome. And if you've been here before, welcome back. You guys, I'm going to be doing another study of flowers in a container. And this will be a clear vase container. Now, the last clear vase container that I just posted, that one, I created kind of the preliminary shape and everything for it in the very beginning. This one I'm now creating as I go along. So, but I am putting the greens down. I didn't pull the greens all the way to the very bottom edge because I will probably be framing this piece, and I'm going to have to keep that in mind a little bit too. So, and that can all be determined where the mat and everything sits when I frame it. So I'm not taking the stems all the way to the bottom. So now I've just put in some random shapes, and I am putting down Magello Mission Gold's Quinacridone Crimson Lake. And I'm going in and I'm hitting the edges. I'm bumping the edges, and by that I mean my quill is wet. The paper starts off dry, okay? So I go in with my wet quill and I bump the edge of that flower where all the pigment is, and it follows that track of my brush where it's wet because I pull it outward and the pigment follows it. So that's what I mean by bumping edges. Now I'm going in to the area where the flowers are, okay? And I'm dropping in some of this periwinkle blue Ranger spray stain. And I'm doing that, I'm putting that down to create an atmospheric background with the spray stain, okay? It's going to be a very, very soft, translucent blue background. But I do the spraying in kind of in the center where the flowers are, because what happens is that spray stain has a tendency to leave stain spots. So you probably do see the stain spots there, but that's fine if they're in the flower area because I can build something from that. So I'm not worried about that, but I am working relatively quickly here because I am working with ink. So ink doesn't give you much time to work. So you got to work fast. So once that goes down, you have to know you're going to have to think quick. But one thing you do need to keep in mind is make sure you don't close in white spaces. You keep some white spaces. Now I'm making some mark making, and you're probably wondering why do you create these marks? I create these marks so that when the people look at the piece, their eye travels from the upper quarter to the bottom, to the left, to the right. Your eye travels around. So it just kind of gives something in the background for them to look at. I didn't do too much of that in this painting. It just didn't translate into doing that as I was painting. The painting will typically tell you what it needs. You just need to follow your instincts and go from there. So now I just keep dropping in more of that Crimson Lake and just adding more depth. And now I'm going to go in with my liner, and I'm just going to slightly drop in some bright clear violet and randomly putting that down into the centers, and I'm letting the pigments mingle together and do their own thing. I'm not going to touch it. Just let it do its thing. That way your flowers look a little bit more organic and not... We want to keep them loose looking. If that's what we're trying to achieve here. If we're trying to achieve a loose painting, we don't want to get too heavy-handed in our painting. Now, should we put a few little details in there? Yes. We'll do that as the painting progresses. So then I went in and I just splattered some watered down olive green, and then that will also disperse into the background where the paint, where the paper is wet from my quill, and it will slightly disperse. Some areas might be more dry where it'll leave more of a spot, which is also very pretty. Now I have got some permanent yellow light, and I'm just dropping that in some certain areas. And now that's that bright clear violet, and I'm just bringing in some depth is all I'm doing, is just adding some depth to the flowers. And again, I'm not moving that around too much. I'm allowing it to do its own thing, and I go on to the next stage. And while that's all dispersing, I move on, but I keep my eye on everything because things can get out of control. So you always have to keep your eye moving. So now I have the Ranger's turquoise vibe down. I felt like the periwinkle blue was so soft as it was drying. The painting needed a little bit more punch. So I went in and threw in some of this turquoise vibe. It's a little bit more vibrant, and I think it was a good call for me. But I do get a little silly here in a minute. Right there, I start dropping in this peacock blue from Mission Gold, thinking, oh, maybe I'll make these pretty like turquoisey like flowers. Well, that was just looked like a hot mess, and I knew it. And I let it sit there and disperse and see if something was going to happen, and nothing was happening. So I knew that I would have to back these out, not later, but pretty quickly. So I do move on and I work on some other things while I think it might disperse, and it doesn't. And I'm going to get my quill wet here, and I'm going to end up getting all those turquoise areas reactivated and wet, and then get some toilet tissue and kind of pick that all up. So you can see right there, I'm just breaking that all up and dispersing it just a little bit, and there's the tissue, picking up the excess water, picking up the excess pigment. And because that ink is still wet, it's still sitting there very wet, I'm able to pick up some of it so it doesn't look too harsh. And it was all sprayed in the area of where the flowers were. So I can build all around that. So right now you see me taking my quill along the top edge of where the container would be. And I'm just doing a little work there, just dragging that brush through that stem and making my first marks for the vase. Now I figured I would probably do something a little bit different than, I got ink all over my hand. You know, I put a glove on my right hand, but why did I not put a glove on my left hand? I knew I was going to be working with ink. And then I walk around for the rest of the day with hands full of ink. So I need to put it on both hands when I'm using the ink. Okay, so here I go. I'm just kind of blocking off a section of that vase and then doing the spray stain on the left. It's a very, very quick and easy way to create a container. And then I'm dragging my quill through the edge there, just kind of making it nice and smooth. But I'm also taking a little bit of that turquoise vibe and bringing it into the middle of my vase. Yes, I have to bring the turquoise into the middle of my vase, but I don't want to bring it into all of the vase. You got to be able to see the background color through the vase, but you also have to keep room and think that there's still got to be stems in here. There's also got to be, you've got to retain some white. So you got the turquoise, the green, and the white that needs to happen in the vase to make sure that it looks like it's translucent. I'm just focused on that edge of that vase right now because it's wet, and I can still manipulate things while it's wet. Now I'm going to take that paper towel again, and I'm now going to do the other side. I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to spray this side just a bit more heavy. As you can see, I'm doing a lot more ink over here because I want this side to be a little bit more darker shadowed, just to give that little bit of different contrast. Again, just dragging a little bit of that vibe in to the center and loosening that all up a little bit. And then while that's all dispersing a little bit, I'm going to go in and I'm kind of dry brushing these petals, and it's leaving these very textured like marks. Do I like the textures? Yes and no. So I go in with my quill and some water and I soften some of them. I do retain some of the texture, but a lot of it gets softened. Okay, so now it's time for me to just start making a few leaves and some stems, working quickly, not overthinking, trying to keep everything moving fast. And there I go, trying to disperse the puddles of ink that are kind of sitting along the edge of that container. And I randomly make kind of like little marks, but that all eventually, just because the paper's wet, it will disperse. If it's dry, it's not going to disperse. One thing I want to talk to you guys about is what is it? What is it about the watercolor community and they don't like white watercolor? Why is that? Why are we taught that we should only use the white watercolor when we need to do a highlight? I think white watercolor can do some really cool effects to some paintings. I know I'm probably one of a few, I don't know, I haven't seen anybody else really pushing white watercolor like me. But I find it just magical. You guys, you have to let me know what you think of using white watercolor. I know a lot of you guys some of you guys are real true purists that have been painting for a long time, and you're like, only retain the white. And maybe the way I paint is kind of almost sacrilegious to you guys. But I'm curious as to what other people think about using white watercolor. Now, the white watercolor that I use is a correction material. It is an actual watercolor. I contacted the company to make sure, and he says, well, yes, ma'am, for the last 80 years, it has been white watercolor, and that's what it's known in the industry as. But the thing is, you go into other groups and people think it's an ink, and I will still get it today. I can do a tutorial on using the product, and I can say it's a watercolor and tell you it's watercolor, but they will still come back at me and say it's an ink. It's not an ink, okay? It has lifting properties. You can remove it. If it was an ink, there would be no removing it. It would stain. So it is a watercolor, and it does the coolest effects. I love it. I love it. I wish other people would embrace the fact that white watercolor is actually something that should be used. So many times we get white watercolor and it just sits in our little tray or wherever we keep our paints, and it never gets touched, only for those moments. And I want you guys to break out your white watercolor and give it a try. Play with it a little bit. See what comes out of your pieces if you add that in. Now, some of them, especially the one that I use, is very opaque. So it can muddy a painting really quickly. Now I'm seeing some of you guys in my group, you're overusing the P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White, and I get it. It's so much fun to use, and you can create cool effects and do things with it. But when it dries, your painting dries, it dries very chalky and dull. So you have to know where to use it and how much to use it. Don't overuse it. And you're also going to probably end up with contaminated paint if you're using that much bleed proof white, and you're going to have to take your paints and take them to the sink and run them under the faucet and clean all of that paint so it's nice and vibrant again. So pull back on the bleed proof white, use it strategically, but if you use it strategically, it can do some absolutely beautiful things. So let's see. Let's focus on what I'm doing here again. I just wanted to talk to you guys about that. I'm creating these stems with a palette knife. And I'm just going to randomly put some stems down. I'm using the edge of the palette knife. I'm using the actual palette knife itself, the flat part. And it's giving me cool textures. I like it. It was a really good call to use the palette knife when making the stems in the vase, because you don't want them to look really perfect in there because they're all kind of floating around in water. So I think it turned out really nice. Okay, so I have got the edge of my quill filled with some bleed proof white, and I'm kind of dragging it along the side of this vessel because I did not like the straight edge of this vessel. It just didn't feel right to me. It just, the flowers felt so soft, and then there was this hard edged vase, and I just didn't like what I was seeing. So I made a call while I was painting to soften it. And I did that by softening the edge with a little bit of that Dr. P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White. And because that ink was still kind of wet over there, it kind of mingled with it and dispersed, and it all created a beautiful effect. Now I'm just going in with my small liner brush, and I'm just making small lines in this flower. There's like a white center there, and I'm just creating some texture. Now I'm just creating some more of these lines, and I'm using that bright clear violet, and I'm pulling it back off. I put it down and it was too dark. So now I'm lifting it and softening it. It was just too strong. Now I'm working on the upper edge of the vase. So I see a flower forming there, so I just added a little bit more white. And I end up doing that in the upper section. I think I ended up doing that after the painting was dry. I went in and kind of lightly put in a little bit more white because I felt like it needed to be balanced out a little bit. So that kind of that spot up in the upper right, I ended up putting a soft white flower up there after filming. Now I'm just pushing the color a little bit. I got a ton of pigment there, and now I had a very wet quill and went um, into that Crimson Lake and really grabbed a bunch of the pigment and then kind of splashed it onto the paper. Working some stem work. This is where those white spaces, it comes in really handy to have those white spaces so you can add those little stems in there and you can see all that. If you closed all that in, you wouldn't be able to do that. Now I'm just actually dropping in just a little bit of orange into the center of some of these little sprinkles that I put down. Just adding some orange to the flowers that are the Crimson Lake. Looks like I had a little bit of permanent yellow light that I went around. I did that orange and then I did a little permanent yellow light just to add a little bit of a highlight. I did not like what I was seeing here. So now I am getting rid of the areas that I did not like. And splashing in some white watercolor correction material. And I think I'm going to let you guys just finish watching out the rest and how I finish completing the piece. In the meantime, you guys, be safe out there, stay well, and God bless you guys. Until next time, bye for now.